The wheel of time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, a Wheel of Time read-along podcast. Each week, we will be reading, discussing, and digesting a small selection from Robert Jordan's fantasy opus. This quest is led by Tylor, a true Wheel of Time warrior.
I have all stories, ages that were and that will be. And I'll be joined by Greg, a complete novice to the Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time and the wheel of a man's life turn alike without pity or mercy.
Join us each week as we read the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time, traveling deeper and deeper through the glass columns.
But what does that even mean?
No. You don't get to find out yet. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read-along podcast that never tells you exactly when we are recording, but if you are listening live, it's a spooky Halloween edition this week. Greg, how great was it that the episode airing on Halloween has Robert Jordan's version of Hellhounds? This is as close to a holiday special episode as we get.
I actually had that exact same thought. I'm like, oh, this is spooky season and we're doing spooky things. The listeners can't see that you even have spooky decorations in your recording studio, the palatial Tylor recording studio. I have to imagine those are from Steph, former guest of the podcast, decorating for work, not you trying to impress me.
I'm pretty sure that what is behind me is Halloween decorations that are there exclusively so that Steph can buy candy and not feel bad about it because it's Halloween decorations and a pumpkin thing. I'm going to spend less time criticizing my wife's decision to buy all of the candy because I'm eating half of it. And instead, I think we should devote a little bit of time to our two chapters this week, Chapter 43, Shadowbrothers, and Chapter 44, Hunted, which we are here, I think, tonight primarily to test our theory that when exciting things happen in a chapter, we never have very much to say about it. Was that your read as well? Like, these were fun action scenes, but I don't know how much I have to say.
Yeah, I will say particularly the first one. Well, my notes are long in just that many things happened. Right. I don't have a lot to say about them, but just listing the things that happened, I was like, oh, there was a lot in here. Before we begin, I need to know how high on the potential title list was Shadowbrothers for this podcast?
Not at all, but that's a pretty solid one. I like it.
We just lean into the bro side of what we're doing here. All right, take us away. It's a parent chapter. You must be excited.
Yeah, we should introduce every chapter by just on a 1 to 10 scale. How good of a podcast title is this? Because Easing the Badger, 10 out of 10. Unfortunately, this week we have chapter 43, Shadowbrothers. So the woman at the inn starts singing, but the songs that she is singing are much less risque than they were last week because now she knows there is an Aes Sedai staying at the inn. We learn that Perrin says he is having a conversation with Lan about how he knew that the Grey Men were coming and how he was aware of what was going on. He says he smells the Grey Men and then also says that he had smelled them in several previous villages now that he recognizes the scent. And Lan says that they must have been Grey Men who were following Rand, but now it seems the Grey Men are following Perrin himself. He then, Lan says that he is going to look around to see if there are any signs of anything else going on, and he invites both Perrin and Loial to come along to help, and then Zareen invites herself. They go outside. Perrin thinks he is kind of wasting his time. He can't add anything beyond what Lan is doing, but then Lan stops and sees two footprints that look like dogs in the stone and says that they were made by darkhounds. Zareen is doubtful that this is possible, and that kind of highlights just how mythical darkhounds seem to be. Lan basically says, I'm not going to answer any questions about this, but he sends all of them back into the inn and immediately says that he is going to head out and try to help Moiraine. He heads inside, he gets his sword, he basically dismisses anything else that is brought to him, and then he immediately heads out after Moiraine. Perrin then goes to his room. He has to convince Zareen not to follow him in there. Then he follows asleep and begins dreaming. He calls out to Hopper and instead has visions of Matt dicing with Baalzamon behind him, and also a few other visions of the girls in a cage and a couple of other kind of vague things. He then sees Hopper, who tells him that he is too young and not ready, that the last hunt comes, and that the not dead and Shadowbrothers come for him. And then Perrin wakes. He wakes with Zareen in his room. She asks who he is and if he is the dragon, and then says he could use some more hair on his chest. Perrin is clearly flustered by only having a blanket covering him with a girl in the room. He asks what she wants. She deflects, and then Moiraine suddenly arrives and says one of the Forsaken rules Ilion. And that is a pretty good cliffhanger at the end of a chapter. Like you said, lots of cool stuff happens, some of it in dreams, some of it introducing a new monster, but there's not a whole lot of like detailed scenes or character work that we can really be picking apart here. So I guess what was your takeaway from this brief but I think interesting chapter?
Well, you see, Tylor, when you see only one set of Darkhound footprints, that is where it was carrying you the whole time. Yes, I got him to choke on his water. That was the goal, and I knew I could do it. I just had to hit the beat just right. Pretty fun chapter. Very cool to get a new beastie, right?
Yeah.
I found that I personally had trouble with the Shan Chan beasties. That I don't think it was a flaw in the writing. They were more fantastic, more strange and different.
Yeah.
Big dog from hell. I got that. That's easy. I can figure that out, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a nice fantasy thing because it's a familiar trope. It's something that we would see in a D&D game or another. I think of the wargs from
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings. I think of the I don't know, other dog things. So I guess Ahsoka just had some.
Oh yeah.
Spoiler for Ahsoka. I don't know if that counts. There were wolf dog things. So that was pretty cool. But I found myself kind of playing Tylor's gonna say I have blank things in my notes. Guess what they are.
Fair.
And I will say the only one that really stood out to me, I thought, was this way in which Lan pulled in Loial and Perrin to investigate, and how they both immediately were like, I don't belong here. And then you realize that they now, I don't know if they stand toe to toe with Lan, but they are, a complementary skill set. So Lan can see a set of kind of tracker clues. Perrin can smell and use wolf sense. And I thought the big news was that Loial can see a kind of marking that the others can't. I have to believe that this is like very important for the weeks and months and years ahead of us on the Through the Glass Columns journey.
Nobody telling whether it is or not. Just we gotta wait 5 years to find out. I agree. I think that this is something of a promotion in Lan's eyes. I think in particular, in the first book, we saw how hard Nynaeve had to work to earn Lan's respect in terms of tracking, keeping watch, doing those sorts of things, right? That was the foundation of their, initial relationship, was she was shockingly good at those sorts of things. And so, I think that this is interesting, right? Lan doesn't trust many people with anything. And so the fact that they are now at least in the outer circle, if not the inner, is, a good sign of where Lan is at with Perrin and Loial. But at the same time, I do want to say, Perrin needed wolf powers to gain the same amount of respect that it took Nynaeve like 3 weeks in the woods. Like, this isn't that much of a promotion for Perrin. You're still pretty low on the totem pole.
Yeah, and he doesn't seem to really like, because he's our narrator, he notes this change and he's surprised, which I think is why it stands out to me that this is a surprise. But it's not like he really thinks he's gotten a major promotion. He just thinks he's useful in this particular moment. I did think a lot about Zareen, where it's like, oh, things are getting gnarly, and now she's kind of understanding, like there's the significant other welcomed into your extended family and everybody's polite for like the first kind of dinner or something. This is the third dinner where it's like, oh, they're around all the time now, so we can air our junk and our dirty business all around this dinner.
I think maybe my favorite part about the Perrin plot in this entire book is just how many times they mention something offhandedly from one of the previous 2.5 books, and Zareen is just like, wait, what? What? No, that's not real. Like, there's something really wonderful about a character who is playing catch up basically from the 2.5 books you've just read, because you get to feel a little smugly superior to Zareen every time she doesn't know something. And it's like, yeah, I actually know quite a bit about this world. Uh, I think that to me was the highlight of this chapter, was those characters getting involved, Zareen pushing herself into it, and then kind of the jockeying of positioning and who is on top of the totem pole and what have you. My only other note from anything before Perrin falls asleep in this chapter is Darkhound is just the worst name for a series that already has dark friends. Like, why, Robert Jordan? Why did you do this to me? Anything else in the early part of the chapter? Because I'm clearly scraping the bottom of the barrel already for things to say about the first half here.
I like Darkhound because it's like Dark Friend is the action figure you asked for, and Darkhound's the accessory that your parents accidentally bought you instead. It's like, yeah, I didn't want the Darkhound. Or
Yes,
like it's like Superman's dog, right?
I was gonna say it's like that internet meme, right? We have dark friends at home, honey, and then the dark friends are home and just
Yeah.
misshapen dogs. Yeah, that sounds right. Uh, okay, so then,
The only
oh, please.
well, I was just gonna note I just wanted to highlight the taxonomy we get, because I thought it was funny that I'm always trying to figure out the order of operations of how we deal with the bad guys, and the characters did it for me this time. They are like, Darkhounds are worse than Trollocs, but not as
Yep.
bad as Mirdrawl. And I was like, done. I can put those 3 items in a list, and they're in order. So I appreciated that. But that's all I have from the early part.
I guess I would just add on top of that one tiny little other thing. If we are reading a Robert Jordan book, that means some things have 18 names, and we just learned another name for Murdrail. Apparently, in Saldia, they are called fetches, according to Zareen. So, new nickname alert. I then get to do my favorite thing on this podcast, which is make you answer questions about dreams, knowing how much you hate them. Was this just pile of visions you didn't care about dreams, or was there actually something that you were interested in among Perrin's dream sequence?
Holding up my notebook, Hopper Dream. Loving this. I thought this was fun.
Whoa.
While it's just a bunch of visions, I think the fact that Hopper's there makes me care like so much more. And I could be highfalutin and say, oh, it's because it's like Dante and Virgil leading Dante through the underworld. Or I could say, Hopper's cool, and I like Hopper, and I like the fact that there is this kind of wolf spirit guide, and that we're tapping into that. So I like too that Hopper can fly and is like in the light and the dark, and I maybe still don't care about those visions, but I'm like, but there's a cool wolf flying through them, whatever's happening. So in terms of the visions, the one I wrote down is Matt is playing dice with Beelzemon. So in case you didn't think there was going to be a consequence for what's going on in the Matt plot line, there you go. He's playing with darkness. He's dabbling in forces he should not dabble in. So that's what I took from that vision.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other thing that I would add to that is just there's a really lovely moment at the beginning of it where Perrin is calling out for Hopper, and then he has to take a moment to remind himself to look up because because Hopper can fly here. And that's just like the moment of Perrin remembering that for himself. Anytime I think of Hopper, I love the image of Hopper being the cub who is like hopping up and trying to catch a butterfly. And so anytime I'm reminded that he can fly, it makes me very, very happy. So that's worth I think you're right. Like visions that kind of mostly tell us things we already knew. Our characters are important and might be involved with traps. Hooray. We then wake up and get a very interesting scene because I'm trying to figure out here what is going on with Zareen, and her showing up unannounced in Perrin's room to watch him sleep doesn't help me figure out what's going on. Like it's Clue, but I don't think it's a helpful one. What is your take on this sequence where we kind of almost miss the why of it and she refuses to tell us?
Yeah, it first of all felt like Robert Jordan really doesn't know romance, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think you missed Oppenheimer this summer, but there was a big discourse about how, like, does Christopher Nolan know how human beings interact and or flirt and or have sex? And the consensus was no, Christopher Nolan does not know these things. And you've said something similar about Robert Jordan in the past where it's like, oh, okay, so this is just okay that like we just stare at the naked man while he's asleep, and we see this as flirty, we see this as crossing a line. I think you're right that it's just like not defined,
Yeah.
even if our modern sensibilities would say, yeah, definitely crossing a line.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what Robert Jordan, I think, struggles with. I think he does a really good job of writing romances in the character's head, right? I think his characters think about romance the way that real human beings think about romance, but I don't think they do romance the way real human beings do romance, right? They like meet when one of them falls into the courtyard of the other one's palace, and then they don't see each other for 2 books, but they're definitely totally in love, right? Like, and I think that's what we're seeing here, right? Robert Jordan knows exactly how to write Aaron not knowing what's going on with Zareen, but isn't quite sure what the actual situations a human male would find themselves in which they would have those feelings about Zareen. Like, that's my takeaway, right? Like, Robert Jordan, maybe not the best romance writer, but is a really good character writer, even if his 2 characters are in love. Like,
Well, and I like that, and I guess that just takes us back to our now old familiar "it's on the bingo card" defense, which is these are teenagers, right?
right.
And so, like I remember when I was in middle school, it was like, oh, I had a crush on that girl at my camp cabin. I'm gonna think about her as if that is a possibility. Nope, never gonna see that person again, right?
Right.
Like you have that, and so I feel like that explains the Elaine one, right? It's like,
Yeah.
yes, he seemed awesome. He's from Canada. You don't know him. And so I think that one I can kind of push into the teenager camp. This one, it's like creepy teenager, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no, even if you're hormonal and a teenager, there's no like, I was just outside your window watching. I mean, this is even in the room, so I
Yeah.
shouldn't even give it that benefit of the doubt. So I think it's a little iffy. I think to your kind of main point, it did kind of give me a little bit of a flag about Zareen. I hadn't been
Yeah.
worried about her, and this was just a little too weird. Wild speculation is it kind of feels like a character not entirely acting of her own will,
Mm.
meaning if it's like a blackmail or something like that, like, oh, they're holding her sister in a castle and she has to give intel on Perrin or else they stab her. It
Yeah.
felt a little like that, or something where she wasn't just like, hey, he's cute, I'll go watch him sleep. So, but I don't know. I'm not sold on it. That's just how it felt in the moment.
Yeah, no, and I think that is where I am kind of at this point in the reading is there's a lot of conflicting clues about Zareen, and I'm not quite sure what to make of them yet, which good. We've only known her for like 15 chapters. Let's wait a little bit until we get this one totally figured out. I have nothing else to say other than, oh, by the way, one of the big bads that you haven't heard of before is ruling the city is a real good way to end a chapter. Like, it's just a good cliffhanger. I'm mad I haven't come up with something that good in our Dungeons and Dragons game. Any last thoughts about the chapter before we move on to chapter 44?
I was gonna ask a question, but I think it's actually in the next chapter. So if not, it will at least be an opportunity to talk. But just because we're being brief about it doesn't mean it was a bad chapter. Heck of a fun
Yeah.
time. I raced through these pages and really enjoyed it. It's just, not the best podcasting chapter, perhaps. But, come on, Robert Jordan, plan ahead for podcasting 20 years after your death, 30 years after your death. Make
Yeah,
this easy for us.
he definitely was writing this book when the internet was a brand new thing. That's weird to think about. Chapter 44, Hunted. Perrin asks if they are leaving, and Moiraine basically makes a quip about their options are get killed by Samael or leave. Zareen is now hesitating when she is asked by Moiraine whether she will continue to follow along, but she continues to be solid and says that she is not going to leave. Perrin asks why, but Moiraine cuts her off and says, I don't have time for this teenage crap. We need to go. Moiraine then tells the innkeeper that she also needs to flee, and Moiraine is deducing that the Grey Men were not sent by Samael because he wouldn't have sent both the Darkhounds and the Grey Men, and so she realizes there are multiple people who are after Perrin. When she then also snaps at Lan for disobeying her instructions. And at this point, Perrin starts to kind of press Moiraine, kind of saying, like, why are they after me? What is going on? And at this point, Perrin lets slip. Why are they after me? I'm not the Dragon Reborn like Rand. And Moiraine immediately turns to Zareen and is like, nope, you're never leaving us again. You know who the Dragon Reborn is. She then sends the innkeeper away from Ilion that night. Moiraine is then kind of cryptically chiding Perrin, but not giving him all of the information about why she's frustrated with him. And then Perrin says, as they kind of get on the road and start to ride out of town, Perrin is thinking how glad he is that they have avoided the storms, that things have settled. And then Lan tells him, oh no, actually, Darkhounds only come out when it's not raining. And so this is a horrible thing. They hear a number of howls in the distance, and we get the classic fantasy chase sequence where we ride our horses very shakily through the forest and eventually end up at a place where we need to make our stand. Loyal and Zareen are sent to take care of the horses over by a weird statue head that somehow gets like a page of description. And then the Dark Hounds charge. We get a number of arrows being shot by Perrin. We see Lan kind of getting ready to defend them physically. And then out of nowhere, Moiraine shoots out what appears to be balefire and eliminates all of the Dark Hounds immediately. They are all gone. Nothing else. When asked what she was doing or what caused the Dark Hounds to die, she basically tells Perrin this is something that is banned almost as strictly as anything in the tower and won't give details. And then fairly quickly, they leave, although not before someone mentions that Matt has blown the horn, and we get another classic Zareen going, what did you just say? And then we end the chapter. We then get to Matt's section of the chapter. He is sitting at a campfire with Tom, and he immediately does what he's been told not to do, that is take apart a firework. It doesn't explode, luckily. Tom is very mad at him for taking apart a firework, and then a woman and 3 individuals approach their campfire, asking for directions to the nearest inn, but it turns out they all have crossbows. They get in a fight. They kill all of the people except for the woman. Matt wants to negotiate with her, but Tom kills her very quickly. Matt is upset because you just don't kill women, but Tom's retort of, yeah, you kill anyone who's trying to kill you seems pretty reasonable. Tom eventually basically says this can't be about the letter. The people who are after you could not possibly have anything to do with this intrigue, but Matt seems doubtful about that and basically says, I am going to deliver this letter so no one will come after me, but he cannot get the look of the woman out of his head. I just talked a lot. Please don't make me choke on my water this time. Say something about chapter 44.
Well, Hunted, I would have given a 9 out of 10 as a podcast title, but it turns out we can't have it. It's already been taken. Executive producer Dick Wolf presents Parker Posey, giving a history of the U.S. Marshal Service, coming this 2019 to your podcast service of choice. So there you go.
And that was the first ad on Through the Glass Columns. Didn't know we were doing this. Excellent.
That's what existed. Very funny to me. Yeah, this is, you said it, this is classic fantasy action. I very much was thinking of Two Towers with the chase of the wargs across the Riddermark.
Yeah.
Particularly when Perrin pauses and takes his shots. I don't remember that scene from the Two Towers book that well, but they made a big meal out of Legolas doing that and then flipping up on his horse in a weird way. And so it just kind of felt like that's what we were doing. And, you know, maybe among that, my favorite bit was just that, like, oh, they can be killed. That's good. Like,
yeah.
And like Perrin needed to learn that and we needed to learn that. But if I were to highlight something that I thought was important from this chapter moving forward, I think it's 100% Perrin letting slip about Ran and filling Zareen in on that.
Yeah, and I think particularly important about that, which I agree is kind of the big moment of the first section of this chapter. I'll be honest, I forgot the Darkhounds were in this chapter entirely. I thought that was like the big dun 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 moment at the end of the Perrin section, as far as I had recalled it. I think for me, what is most important about this is Moraine's reaction to it, right? There's been a little bit of intrigue, I think, around Moiraine and Zareen and how they're interacting and why Moiraine is letting her stick around and what the limitations were. And all of that comes to a head when it turns out the words Rand and dragon in the same sentence are what it took for all of Zareen's kind of like rope she was given to hang herself is taken away and she has no room for errors anymore. She is a part of this. And I thought that like turn on a dime for Moiraine is the thing that really stood out to me. But obviously, there's a bunch of characters who are potentially influenced by this shift. Which one of them maybe stood out to you? Was it Perrin? Was it Moiraine like me? What intrigued you about that sequence in particular?
I would definitely say Perrin, I think, just slipped up. And while Moraine will grumble at him, I don't really see this having a lasting impact on him.
Yeah,
Zareen, in as much as she is now bound to the fellowship or this piece of the fellowship. So I think I'm going to agree with you and say Moraine. And, I thought in that moment, Moraine felt her usual self of playing like three-dimensional chess. And she's so busy worried about the third game board that
yeah,
she can't believe Perrin just knocked over three pieces on the first game board. And so I think she's kind of working on the fly,
yeah,
and that mood kind of permeates the whole chapter. Is
yeah,
Moraine is off kilter again, and whenever that's true, we had talked last week about how it almost felt like Moraine was going away, and like surprise, she didn't go away,
yeah,
but it still feels like she hasn't recovered from that, right? From the
yeah.
Gray Men, from the Council, and now knowing that it is Samael.
Samael is how I've been saying it, but we haven't gotten this on the show yet, so no confirmation of correct pronunciation.
Being a good Bostonian, I was just like, it's Sam Adams, bro. Like, all right. Sam Adams is here. Yeah, I think Off Kilter Moraine is more entertaining, but also scary.
Yeah.
So that works. And it was pulled into the action of the chapter with that.
Yeah, and I think the one part of that that really worked the best for me in terms of like off kilter Moraine is Moraine taking a swipe at Lan about not obeying her orders, and then the most shocking part, basically losing the argument with Lan about whether it was the right thing. Like I don't think we've seen Moraine out talked before in this series. She is very off kilter. I think that's exactly the right read on where we're at here. At this point, I then had kind of like one more quick note, which is just how quickly we transition from travel, travel, travel to action, action, action. I was expecting like a big, long on the horses chase scene, and instead it's like, now we'll never outrun them. Let's find a place to fight. It was very quick. And I think it's designed to make it seem like the Dark Hounds are really kind of like terrifying. There's no way to outrun them. You can't outdo them. But it creates this real weird dynamic where the Dark Hounds are built up to be the most devastating thing ever. And then the action sequence involving them is like 4 seconds long if you ignore Perrin futilely shooting arrows.
Yeah. It's exactly what we talked about before about I think this was on this podcast. I don't know. I do too many podcasts. The segment of Lion Witch in the Wardrobe, that's a battle, and it's like two
Yeah.
paragraphs, and then the filmmakers are like, let's make this an hour and a half long battle of mythical creatures. And so it feels exactly like that. Like the
Yeah.
show can make a meal of this and make it a climactic end to an episode when they get here eventually, but that's never been Robert Jordan's style. And it
Yeah.
seems to me that this is more than we usually get. So it's kind of a treat in that regard, but it's still not where he's interested in it, like
Yeah.
where his interest lies. He wants to keep the pieces moving. I mean, if he were here talking about his favorite revelations of the chapter, I think he'd talk about the Rand one, but also just that Moraine is piecing together the strategies of
Yeah.
those enemies and that there have to be multiple enemies. That seems way more what he's interested in than shooty, shooty, stabby, stabby, bark, bark, or what have you.
Yeah, I think if it's any indication, I'm pretty sure Loyal and Moraine spend as much time on the page investigating the head of the statue that they are fighting near as they do actually killing the Dark Hounds. It's a very brief sequence, which I think works. I found then the most interesting part of that action sequence not to be the action, but Moiraine afterwards just being like, oh, yeah, I did a thing that no one's allowed to do. I could probably be expelled for doing it next. Like, just the nonchalance
And
with which she did that just blew me away.
yeah, and she puts it up with the three oaths. She's clear that it's not one of the three oaths, but it's like might as well be. And so it was like, oh, geez, like we didn't know she had this power, right?
Correct.
But prior to now, or did we? Okay. And so then it's like, yep, okay. It shows how comfortable the character has gotten with duplicity, and it's what was needed at this moment. And so she'll just show us,
Yep.
but you know, nobody should know. Hopefully, nobody finds out at the end.
And I think it's also an indication, kind of indirectly, of just how out there are some of our characters are. Like, it's worth noting Nynaeve is a woman who cannot reliably channel when she wants to, and she accidentally used balefire like 4 chapters ago, the thing that is banned in the White Tower. So like, this should also be an indication maybe of like just how out on a limb our characters are in terms of trying things that they are not remotely prepared for, right? They're dabbling way above their ken. I didn't really have too much else towards the end of this Perrin Moiraine section, other than to say I had a giant all caps laugh out loud when Zareen was like, "Wait, someone already found the horn." That's my whole thing. Like, that was just a wonderful 2 seconds of dialogue that really worked for me.
Yeah, and like you said last chapter, that's the benefit of having a new character arrive. You might as well have some of that fun,
Yeah.
and not make it all like there's. So I'm again, when are we recording? Nobody knows. But I'm currently watching Loki, and Loki, they did this really weird thing in Marvel's Loki, where they stole Loki from the minutes after the Avengers, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
like, oh, cool, it's a whole different Loki. This is like bad guy Loki again. And then they like immediately reset the character so he had his full history again. This
Yeah.
is all season 1 of Loki. This is nothing new to Loki. And I'm always like, well, it's very much the J.J. Abrams Star Trek too. It's like we're in a whole new timeline, but let's do Khan second anyway, right? Like,
Yeah.
no, like you had the chance to do whatever you wanted, and you picked that. So I admire that they're not just like having this character kind of immediately file in and be alongside them. They keep reacting to these differences and these changes. So it's good. It works.
Yeah, this is something that I want to do to a D&D character now. I want someone to hand me their like intricate backstory where all they're working for is something. And then I want in like the first adventure to have someone just be like, oh yeah, I've got that in my closet. Do you want one? Like, that sounds like a really great way to ruin someone's adventure. I have nothing else to say about the Perrin section. So let's talk about Matt, which it's fun. It's Matt. He does a thing he was told not to do, but I don't have much here. Like, it's brief, and I'm not entirely sure why it needed to be in this chapter. What was your take on this section?
My main take on this is I am not getting the fireworks thing. I should not be thinking about these as like literal our universe fireworks. They are bigger and scarier and more powerful. They're
Nope.
like quasi magic. I don't get them.
He's
They're just fireworks.
he's got firecrackers. Like, yeah.
Okay, so he's just playing firecrackers at the fire, and then Tom is really mad just because they're gonna go pop, bang, fizzle, and
They're
so on.
they're really big fireworks. Like, they might be
Okay.
like Boston Pops fireworks. Like, you could probably blow off an arm with them.
Hmm. Did did Robert Jordan lose a loved one, or did he have a loved one lose fingers to a firework accident? Like this, this is where I was. I'm like, these can't just be normal fireworks. What is happening here? So, okay, really big fireworks.
I want to be really clear. Robert Jordan lived in the South. Based on the people I know from the South, statistically, there's a decent chance he knew someone who has lost fingers from fireworks. But that being said, like, no, I think this is one of my favorite things in this series, because sometimes my problem with fantasy is things get so fantastical that authors forget about like real world things that existed in the eras that they are ostensibly writing about, right? If you read someone like writing a, medieval fantasy story, and then we have like a magical doodad that lets you do exactly the same thing as a water wheel, I'm going to be staring at you like they had it. Why is this magic? And so there's a part of me that's actually really enthusiastic about Robert Jordan saying, like, look, my story isn't purely medieval. It's more kind of like early Renaissance era. That's when we're starting to develop all of these, mechanical, alchemical, non-magical real world technologies. And so putting that in the world, I think, works. But in terms of a first-time reader, no, you're not missing something. Like, this is as simple and basic and almost silly as it sounds. Like, Matt is an 18-year-old who just got the illegal firework that you can't bring into your state, and he wants to cut it open and see what makes it go boom.
All right. Well, I get to do something right now I never get to do, which is I can recommend a fantasy series to you then, based on what you just said. Best fantasy series I ever read dealing with technology and playing with it, and very much the way that you just noted, is Ken Liu's The Dandelion Dynasty. It's a 4-book series, and the first one's called The Grace of Kings. Got it because my wife, I think, had the first one signed in her office because she works in she used to work in a bookstore as of like 2 days ago, worked in a bookstore. And so, oh no, sorry, Catherine, didn't mean to bring it up. Her coworker's going to listen and I'm opening trauma. Sorry, Rachel still loves you. But just had a copy of the first one, and it's really cool because it is playing a lot with that. There are kind of airships, but like in a medieval way and things like that. So people who like whatever Tylor just said should go with that. All right. So literal fireworks. Then it seems to me the only purpose of this scene is that I forgot who Matt knows he's hunted, right? That's the whole thing, right?
Matt knows he's hunted, and then I think we get a new character moment, which is I'm not sure we had Matt's reluctance to harm women prior to this. And we've actually been talking about in the past with Matt, how much is this Matt versus how much of this is past lives. We end this chapter with Matt picturing the woman's face. Matt is very upset when Tom kills her, but it's worth noting Tom kills her, and then Matt immediately finds himself humming a tune about a woman. So if we've been tracking humming related to Matt's state of mind, I think there's some richness in this chapter that's really easy to miss if you're just paying attention to the action and how many people are dying.
Yeah, certainly a good hint. Certainly worth tracking and noting. I have trouble kind of reconciling that because it's like, okay, well, it can't be the literal woman of his old past life, but is it a relation? Is it just that there was a woman? I think that feels rich to me, like you're saying, but I have no answers. Not that you were asking me for answers, because that's not my job on this podcast. I'm the one who says they can't be regular fireworks, only to hear they can be regular fireworks.
Yeah, my job is to give answers like they can be regular fireworks and then refuse to answer any other question for fear of saying something that I should not. This is just a fun set of chapters we had this week. And it's not Robert Jordan's fault that there's not much to say when it's like, that was good. I liked it. There's not too much else there. Any last thoughts before we preview what is actually going to be, I think, both a more exciting and much more fruitful discussion in the following week, both because we've got 3 chapters and because it's always fun to talk about Matt. You never run out of things to say about Matt. Last things in these parent chapters?
I will just say this is definitely, again, if I were reading this in the middle of the night, it would have been like, well, we're not stopping here, right? Like the pace is really picked up all of a sudden. And I think it's always effective when characters are being chased / chasing something. And, I anticipate that we are going to see these paths converge very soon because we only got like 200 pages left, I think, in my edition, maybe a little less than that. Because we've been tracking them all geographically, I guess Matt is the exception. Matt is headed a different direction, but everybody else is headed largely in the same direction and seems to be closer and closer. So That's all thrilling to me. As Tyler said, 3 chapters next week. This would be chapter 45, Camelin, chapter 46, A Message Out of the Shadow, and chapter 47, To Race the Shadow.
Double
Take us
shadow.
home, Tyler.
Yeah, so next week we have 3 chapters. I believe they are all actually following either the same character or same group of characters, which is always really exciting. And I think one thing you were just mentioning, Greg, it feels like the pace is picking up. I think that we really started to see that in the past couple weeks where we were kind of staying in one character's head for an extended period of time. That gives us an opportunity to really move the pieces in a big, large way. And next week we get even more of that. With these 3 chapters, we're back in a fan favorite character's head, and we get to see where they're headed because, as you said, it is much more chaotic than every other character in this book. Where will the chaos lead? Who knows? It depends on how the dice fall. That's the fun part with Matt next time through the Glass Columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, or Amazon. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, you can email us at throughtheglasscolumns@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Twitter by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to the show, leave us a review wherever you're listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time through the Glass Columns.